Chi Gong is medicine for the wounded heart. I'm Ben Ufana, and I know a lot of this material very well since much of it is my own lived experience, yet there are details that I want to make sure to include, so I will refer to my notes at times. Anyway, let's dive into it. In the fall of 2002, I was cat sitting for a friend in Lower Manhattan, and one evening I headed out to a print shop, and on the way, I got confronted by a man who was demanding money from me. I whipped out pepper spray, chased him down the street. He ran behind a car, and we were doing this number for a while. And I got a little frustrated with the chase, and even though I was so angry at him, and I headed on to the print shop as I originally intended, but within a minute, 3 police officers had followed me into the print shop. They had me up against the wall, and because they had pepper spray, they were this close to taking me to jail. And I said to one of the officers, what am I supposed to do? Get assaulted because some local trash thinks he's going to rob me or something? And the officer says to me, one of them, this is New York. You have to get used to it. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go find the most ruthless master I can find to train with, and next time I'm going to paralyze the next asshole who tries to assault me. Within a few days, I headed to Chinatown. There was a martial arts supply store that passed on numerous occasions. So I went in and asked the man working at the counter if he could recommend someone for me to train with. And there's a lot of highly adept martial artists, those who've attained mastery even, in the New York City area. But he pointed out this whole rack full of flyers, and so I'm looking at them, and I leave with this stack of all these flyers. Bring them home with me, and late in the evening, I'm sitting on the bed and going through these flyers one by one, and some of them had all these glossy photos on them and looked really impressive. You have Shaolin monks and all these dramatic poses, and yet there was one flyer that was printed on dingy yellow-colored paper, and the English grammar was very poor, and yet I was reading it, and I just got this feeling, and I just knew, like, oh, this is the person I want to train with. And so within a few days, I went to Shifu Li Tailiang's studio in the Corona section of Queens, and I started training with him. I was going to classes a few days a week, and then I would be practicing on my own for usually about an hour a day. But the forms he was teaching me were very complex, and a lot of the movements didn't come naturally to me, at least initially. Over time, it did, much more so, but I didn't feel I was really grasping what he was teaching. And so I approached him, and from that time on, I trained with him individually. I would go out to his home and train with him one-on-one. In addition to the various fighting forms, Shifu started teaching me this series of Chi Gong practices, and a lot of those practices were very meditative, graceful, flowing movements. And part of me is thinking, why are you teaching me these meditative practices? I need to learn to rip someone's head off. And yet, Shifu was calmly persistent, and so I would practice when I was with him, but I wasn't taking it all that seriously. I didn't really do any Qigong practice on my own. Yet a few months later, I was back in India, and I met up with a friend, actually someone that I had worked with from the New York area. And I think it had been a year or so since I had seen him. And as I often do when I work with someone and time has elapsed, they'll say, let me check, I want to see how things have progressed. And so I'm scanning his body, and I could see that he had gone through this tremendous development. Like, he had been doing a lot of intensive pranayama practice, which is in many ways different, but there's a lot of parallels with Chi Gong. And looking into his subtle bodies, I could see that he had progressed tremendously. He had developed this really intense presence. He had this glow about him. I was like, wow, what have you been doing? That was my initial response. And as I was talking with him, and he was sharing with me, and it's like, damn, I know there's a lot of commonality between Qigong and pranayama. I better start taking this seriously. And so by the time I got back to New York City, my attitude had shifted radically. I get back into New York, I see Shifu, and he picked up right away that I had a very different mindset. I was much more receptive to what he had to teach me. So he starts teaching me these squatting monkey forms and other intensive Qigong practices. These are the kinds of practices that build this extraordinarily internal power, like the kind of internal power that breaks bones and ruptures internal organs. Big fun, as long as you're not on the receiving end. I started practicing, and I worked myself up to 2 hours a day of intensive Qigong practice. And Shifu was like, whoa, what are you doing? 2 hours? Tone it down a bit. You don't need to go that intense. But when I get passionate about something, I throw myself into it. And what really shocked him was, after some months, one morning I was training with him, and he threw a punch, and I countered and struck him. And not only did he feel the physical blow itself, but he got this jolt of this internal power, because when you do these internal Qigong practices, you start building this power up inside of you. And that's what a lot of these internal arts masters do. I was training with him in Xingyi Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi, and Qigong, and I really didn't understand or comprehend it to begin with. But once I started doing the internal Qigong practices, then my understanding deepened. And then gradually over time, the forms, the movement all came more and more naturally. I'd become more and more proficient. When I struck him that time, he felt that jolt, and he looked at me like, what the? He did not expect it. But we talked, and I think after some time he understood, because of the work I do, the fact that I train with a Native American doctor, a medicine man, and that I already possess these healing gifts that I work with, allowing this presence to work through me to facilitate healing in others, that it gave me a head start. I had a boost. It wasn't too long afterwards that I was on a plane heading back to Sri Lanka. And on the flight, I met this Sri Lankan woman, and we really connected. And even after I arrived, we started texting and calling, and soon I was catching a bus and heading over to the town where she lived, and we started spending a lot of time together. And there was this passionate intensity between her and I. It was very palpable. We also met up later in Frankfurt, Germany, and then Bangkok, Thailand. We got on a bus at one point. We headed to Laos, where we spent a week or two, I forget how long. And then later after that, we met up in Chennai and got a train to Bangalore and back down to Trichy and back to Chennai. It was intense, the time we were together, but as the months passed, that passionate spell began to wear off. And not only was the intensity wearing off, but her family was pressuring her to end the relationship. And it all came to an end abruptly the following summer. At the time, I was absolutely devastated. In hindsight, I can see that my former partner wasn't the best match for me. We really weren't all that compatible. I also recognized that the loss that I experienced at that time was evoking a long history of losses and all the emotions I was holding in my body. And so there was this immense amount of grief, sadness, longing, and other painful emotions that were surfacing. Because I'd spent so much time out of the country, my work had slowed down, but I wasn't in any kind of shape to reach out to new people. So I was really struggling there for a while. During those months following the dissolution of the relationship, I spent a great deal of time breathing from the depths of all those painful, at times overwhelming feelings of sadness, grief, and the hurt, the devastation. And prolonged grief can be especially hard on the body. And at times it felt like it was dragging on indefinitely. And there were moments where I found myself contracting around the loss and all those overwhelmingly painful emotions I was feeling. I think part of it too was I never felt a connection, at least for me, nothing felt as strong as what I had experienced up to that point. And so to have that fall apart was extraordinarily painful. So I spent, as I said, a great deal of time. I'd be breathing from the depths of all those painful emotions, but I'd been training in maybe for a year by that point with Shifu Li Tai Liang. And I'd learned all these Chi Gong practices. So after breathing into those painful emotions for a while, I would switch over and start doing Chi Gong practice. And what I began to notice is that I worked with the Chi Gong practice, drawing that Chi or life force into my body, is that it was very calming and energizing, and it helped to restore some sense of balance. It was helping to mitigate the intensity of all those painful emotions. It was making it more bearable, more manageable. And combining these two very different approaches, breathing from the depths of all those emotions. And this practice is critically important because we need to be able to digest both their lived experiences and emotional responses. And the way you do that, one of the most important ways, is you drop into the emotion itself, centering your awareness, breathing from the depths of what you feel, staying with it, following the feelings as they go through their progression. This is a critically important practice. Yet, incorporating the Qigong along with it, it was accelerating my growth. It was making the process easier. It was helping me to cycle through what I was going through that much faster. And then in October of that year, when I returned to the Wichita Mountains for the Vision Quest, and this is a traditional Native American practice where we go out 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water. This is what I started doing as part of the training from my mentor, Horace Dalkai. He's one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa tribe. So this is a practice they've done for thousands of years. But as I do go through the Vision Quest, I could feel this presence descend into my body. And I could feel this presence working within me, helping to digest my lived experience of that immediate loss, plus the long history of losses that had occurred over my life. Again, I was feeling lighter, much lighter. And not only that, I could feel that I was actually growing from the experience. I also noticed that as I was working with these Qigong practices, that it was helping me to develop a magnetic presence. I found that people were more drawn to me. It also seemed to be helping me romantically. And while Qigong comes from various Chinese traditions, there are many cultures that have developed practices that work with breath, awareness, and the life force. The languages and frameworks differ considerably, but the human body and the internal organs and systems are very much the same. In the ancient Chinese worldview, practitioners of the internal arts understood that the world around us and within us is alive with subtle life forces. Through breath practice and intention, one learns to draw in and cultivate this life force, what they call Qi, and to guide it through their body's internal pathways. And those who train seriously in these disciplines don't experience this as theory, but as something tangible, something that's lived within their own bodies. These practices support the functions of the various organs, and they contribute to our overall vitality. Some practices also increase sexual energy and drive. Intensive daily practice is a vital part of the ancient spiritual traditions in which I've trained. There's a vast body of Chi Gong practices used for healing, health, and vitality, spiritual development, and martial training. The martial artists in particular use specific Chi Gong practices, as I mentioned earlier, to cultivate the extraordinary internal power. Chi Gong can be a critically important practice to incorporate, whether you're in the midst of a breakup, divorce, you've been ghosted, you're struggling with attachment wounds, patterns of abandonment or unrequited love, or simply dealing with the flakiness and craziness of modern dating. It can help you stay more grounded and keep things much lighter. I do want to offer a few words of caution. Start gradually, because I've seen people get excited about it and they're doing all this Qigong practice. And yet, some of those individuals, they've experienced a lot of trauma, they're holding a lot of stagnant and highly charged emotions in their body. Those Qigong practices can dislodge a lot of that emotional intensity, and you could easily find yourself flooded with a lot of really intense emotion that you're not quite ready for yet. So start off gradually, give yourself maybe 10, 15 minutes starting out, and see how you do, and then work up from there, as I did. Also, for thousands of years, many people have tried to use spiritual practices to bypass their suffering. It's important to understand that Qigong, while incredibly valuable, is not a substitute for doing the deep emotional processing of your lived experiences and emotional responses. It's essentially a crucial part of your healing process. This deeper process I've described earlier in this video and so many of my articles. Again, acknowledge what's happening in your life, whatever is impacting you, that's stressing or upsetting you or challenging you, or just whatever you're dealing with. What do you feel in response to it? And where are those feelings situated in your body? Bring as much awareness as you can to what you're feeling. Center your awareness, immersing your awareness in the depths of what you're feeling. Breathe softly and deeply, and continue to follow the feelings and sensations, giving them whatever time they need as they go through their progression. As I said, you still need to do the deep emotional processing. At the same time, incorporating Qigong, as I mentioned earlier, can support and even accelerate your recovery and growth. In closing here, I do want to say, in addition to the individual healing sessions I offer, being that I'm trained by a traditional Native American doctor, I work as a conduit, as indigenous healers have done for thousands of years. I also teach Qigong. So if you feel drawn to either learning the Qigong practices or just working with me individually, if you want to explore this more deeply, you're welcome to message or call me, and I can be reached at 332-333-5155.